Sermon 40, Joshua
If we were to
takes
give
the
a
promised
title
land.
to the lesson tonight, it would be Acquiring the Promised Land. Joshua had been the leader of the army of Israel for 40 years under the guidance of Moses as they wandered through the wilderness, and they had many different nations that came out to fight against them, and Joshua, with the direction and help of God, was able to be victorious over all the nations, and they had acquired the land on the east side of the Jordan River, divided it up between Gad and Reuben and half a tribe of Manasseh. And when Moses died, Joshua had the awesome task of crossing over Jordan and taking the land on the east side of Jordan. And on the east side of Jordan there were many nations, small nations there, but powerful people. People that before time, that is before Joshua's time, had been feared, greatly feared. In that land there in Canaan, there were the giants, the Anaks and the Anakims, men of large stature, almost like we know the story of Goliath and how large in stature he was. And so the 10 of the spies that went into the land at first, they were afraid of the descendants of Anak, the Anakims, and they were afraid to go in battle against him. So these people were powerful people that Joshua was to lead the children of Israel against. But Joshua had the captain of the host that would fight with him. That is, God had his angels to protect Joshua and the people and to be with them as they did battle to the nations round about. He went in and he defeated the great walled city of Jericho. And of course then later, after being obedient unto God, after Achan had been disobedient, he was able to defeat the city of Ai, which was smaller than Jericho. The men of Gideon heard about what had been done to Jericho and the other nations on the east side of the Jordan, and they were afraid. The cities in Gideon were powerful cities. The men of Gideon in the cities were known to be great warriors, but they devised a plan that they would go to Joshua and the leaders of Israel, and they would try to seek peace with them. But when they came to Joshua and they came to the leaders of Israel, their plan was deceptive. That is, they just outright lied. When Joshua asked them from whence they came, they said, we come from a far country. They put on old clothes and old shoes, and they brought old wine bottles, and everything was dusty. Their bread was moldy. Their meat was moldy, and it had the appearance as if they had made a long journey to get to where they had arrived there to talk to Joshua, and convinced Joshua and the princes there of Israel that they were from a far country and they served God and they wanted to have peace with Israel. A mistake was made by Joshua and the leaders of Israel. Through Moses, God had instructed the children of Israel that when you go into the promised land, you're to utterly destroy its inhabitants. Now that was God's instruction. When you go into the promised land, you utterly destroy its inhabitants. And the reason for it, God said, if you go into the land and you keep my commandments, you're going to prosper. You're going to be in a land that's flowing with milk and honey. You're going to have all the blessings of the promised land, the fruit of the land. And you can keep all of that. And you can live in the land peaceably, provided you do what I say. And that is go in and wipe out the inhabitants of the land. Because if you do not, then your children, your sons and your daughters will be taking their sons and their daughters for husbands and wives. And in doing so, along with that interchange of marriage, which God told them not to do, they would also be taking the worship to the idols with it. And God said they'll lead your sons and your daughters astray. So go in and utterly destroy the inhabitants of the land. So we see the beginning of a mistake that was made, and we would say it was an honest mistake because Joshua and the leaders of Israel believed the men of Gideon. They believed them. They believed their story. But 3 days later, they found out, after making an oath with them, that they would let them live among them. They found out they had been lied to. They found out that they had lied. The children of Israel were angry because of that. They were angry at their leaders. But they had sworn by God that they would honor that which they said, and they did. But they added this to it. They told the people of Gideon, from this day forward, you're going to be our slaves. You're going to be hewers of wood and drawers of water. That's going to be your lot. And do you know that those people in Gideon did not look at that as a bad thing? Because they knew that had they not done what they did to save the lives of their people, that they would have all been destroyed. They would have all been destroyed. When Adonijah of Jerusalem heard about what the men of Gideon did, he was very angry, and he gathered 4 other kings and their armies together. And he wanted to punish the men of Gideon. He wanted to set an example, because he wanted the people on the western banks of the Jordan to gather together and fight against Israel. And he knew that if you had those that were weakening, you wouldn't have that united strength. And so in order to teach the people of Gideon a lesson, and he knew that this was a powerful group of people, that they were a strong army that he was going to have to go against, so he got 4 other kings to go with him and to go in to attack the people of Gideon. The people of Gideon did a very wise thing. They sent messengers to Joshua. We're your slaves. You need to come up and protect your investment. You need to come up and protect us. And Joshua did. He assembled the army of Israel, and he marched to Gideon, and he defeated, with the help of God, the 5 kingdoms that came against the Gideonites. He defeated them. He had them running into the mountains. God, in his help in the battle, sent down hailstones from heaven that killed more than did Joshua and his army with the sword, to literally destroy these 5 kingdoms. During the midst of the battle, the 5 kings fled and hid in a cave. They thought that they would not be found, that they would get away, because they had heard what Joshua had done to the king of Jericho and the kings of Ai. He had hung them on a tree and left their bodies hanging there until the sun went down. And he said that this is to be a message to all the kings throughout the land, that this is what we're going to do to you. And so they went and they hid in a cave. Joshua had his army to roll great stones up into the mouth of the cave and close it up, because the battle was going on. He left the kings there sealed up in the cave, and he proceeded to battle against these 5 kingdoms and to destroy them. Something very interesting happened during this battle. Something that had never happened before, and something that's never happened since. Joshua prayed unto God and asked God, make the sun stand still. Don't let the sun go down. Make it stand still. And for 24 hours, one day, the sun stood still. And the children of Israel did battle against these 5 kingdoms and defeated them. Not too many years ago, I was reading a very interesting article in Science magazine that said that now that we are in the computer age, they're able to plug a program into the computer that will calculate time back as far as time exists. And interesting enough, there's 1 day missing. 1 day. In the midst of all the calculations, 1 day is missing. And they don't know how to explain it. But the Bible explains it. Because the prayer of Joshua, the request of Joshua to God, was make the sun stand still. And God did it. He said the sun stood still, the moon stayed where it was. God just literally stopped it. It stayed until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. So the sun stood still in the midst of the heaven, and it hasted not to go down about a whole day. And interesting that when we, in our lifetime, we come into the computer age and the scientists are able to run a computer program that says there's a day missing somewhere. There's a day missing. And we don't know how to explain that. Joshua came back to Makkedah. He rolled the stones away from the cave. He brought out the 5 kings and he hung them. He did to them just as he had done to the king at Jericho and Ai, and just as he would do to all the kings that he would come into battle against. He would literally destroy the cities. He would take the spoil of the cities, and he would take the cattle, and he would take all the gold and silver, and it was to be the treasure for the children of Israel. And in all of the battles, there were a few that would scatter into the mountains, that would get away. Joshua was becoming an old man. He had done battle against 31 kingdoms in 5 years. He had defeated 31 kings. Joshua was an old man when he took leadership. For 40 years in the wilderness, he had been captain. 5 years in fierce battle on the west side of the Jordan, defeating the kingdoms, with the exception of those few that had been able to escape. God said to Joshua, "Thou art old and stricken in years. There remaineth yet very much land to be possessed." That is, there were spots throughout the land that still needed to be taken. But he said to Joshua, "I want you to go ahead and divide the land up, to give it to all the children of Israel, that they will know what their portion is." And so that was Joshua's duty before he died, was to divide the land up, and he divided the land. It's interesting the way that God divided the lands. Israel had 12 sons. And you would think that just the normal process of dividing up is you would divide it into 12 portions. But that's not the way that it was done. Joseph was given 2 portions. His son Ephraim and Manasseh were both given portions. Manasseh had half a portion on the east side of the Jordan and half a portion on the west side of the Jordan. The tribes of Benjamin and Simeon had their portion in the tribe of Judah. They just got cities within the tribe of Judah. The tribe of Levi got 48 cities scattered out through all the other tribes. This was the priestly tribes. So their possession was cities throughout the tribes. In addition to the division that Joshua had to make, he also had to fulfill the promises that had been made to Caleb and to himself. When Joshua and Caleb came back from going out to spy the land, they came back. Moses promised them that they would be blessed because of their faithfulness. He had said to Caleb, I'm going to give you the portion of land that you spied out. And he spied out Hebron, the mountain of Hebron. And he came to Joshua and he reminded Joshua, he said, "I was 40 years old when we left Egypt. I'm 85 years old now. I'm 85. Moses promised me the mountain of Hebron." Joshua remembered that because Moses had promised Joshua his inheritance. And Joshua said to Caleb, "I'm going to give you Mount Hebron." But there was a catch to it. Many of these rebels that had fled into the mountains. And many of those that were in Hebron were powerful men. And Caleb was not afraid. Caleb said, I may be an old man, but I can still fight. And Caleb went and he took his possession. He defeated the men that were in the mountains, and he took possession of Hebron. Joshua was given his city as his portion. The land was at rest because they had broken the backbone of the armies of the nations on the west side of the Jordan. They had defeated the kings. They had gone in and taken control of the cities, but they had not gone in and taken control of the people that had scattered into the mountains and to the valleys and different places to hide and to regroup. When Israel gained rest in the land, their failure was because Joshua had told them that God had said there was much to do. You still need to go and you need to defeat these people. But there was rest in the land. The tribe of Gad and Reuben and half a tribe of Manasseh went back home. They crossed back over the Jordan and went back to their families. I'm sure they were all rejoicing that the war was over, that they were going to be able to enjoy the prosperity of the promised land that God had made to Abraham. They had gone in and they had defeated these powerful nations. And the Bible says that one of the things that happened, and it mentioned that while they were there fighting against these nations, Balaam lost his life. The army of Israel killed old Balaam. You remember he was the one that they wanted to come and curse God's people. And God said, don't go up there. But he wanted to go because he wanted what they were offering. He wanted the power and the prestige and the treasures that they were offering him. And God said, well, just go ahead. And you remember the old donkey began to talk and tell him, And God punished him. The army of Israel killed him. The enemies of God, rather, are those that will be defeated and will be punished. Joshua departed from this life at the age of 110. He had been faithful in his service to God. He had been faithful in his leadership before the nation of Israel. He had done the best that he could do to be able to provide a way whereby Israel would have in their control all of the land of promise. Not only had he divided up the land, but he had put in force all the cities of the children of Levi, so that all the people would have access to the priest. Not only did he do that, he also provided the refuge cities throughout the land, so that those who were guilty of a crime until they were judged and proven innocent or guilty could flee to the rescue cities. And the avengers of blood could not take them because they could go in and they could have refuge until they had a chance to plead their case. Not only that, he had made provision so that the law would be read before the nation of Israel continually. That it would be rehearsed in the ears of the children of Israel, that they would know the will of God and they would continue, hopefully, to carry out the will of God. All of these things Joshua did before he died at the age of 110. But also, Joshua and the children of Israel carried out a wish of Joseph. Before Joseph died, he told the children of Israel, I want my body to be embalmed. And when you leave Egypt, I want you to take it with you. And I want you to bury it in the promised land. Joshua saw that that was carried out. He saw that what the request that Joseph had made had been carried out. They buried him in Shechem, in a parcel of ground which Jacob bought of the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 130 pieces of silver. The only portion of ground that he owned. was the burial spot. And this is where they took Joseph and they buried him. Aaron's son, Eleazar, the high priest, also died. They buried him in a hill that pertained to Phinehas, his son, which was given to him in Mount Ephraim, so that he would have his final resting place. All the great leaders, Moses, Joshua, Aaron, Eleazar, they're all dead. Israel now is facing a different time. They're facing a different time. They're facing a different life. No longer fed by the manna which fell from heaven, they were required to go out and gather the fruit of the land, to follow the laws and the bylaws and the direction of the leaders, the elders of Israel. The land was at peace. They only needed to go out and to possess that little bit which was left, to finish the job, if you please. Joshua was too old to lead anymore. His days were numbered, and they were up. God had given to the children of Israel that which he promised. He said to Abraham, "The land wherein you sojourn, that I will give to you and to your children for an inheritance forever." That was God's promise. The provision and the requirements were this: when you go into the land, do what I tell you to do. Do what I tell you to do. The history of Israel now would change. It would change from those who would lead them to the promised land to those who would lead them in the promised land. And the outlook for the nation of Israel, to say the least, in many instances was bleak, because they failed to carry out what God had instructed them to do. And that is to destroy the inhabitants of the land, to not to give your sons and daughters in marriage, to not to bow down to their gods, but to cleave to the law that Moses gave on the mountain. And in closing, I want to say tonight, Joshua made them, he made them continually rehearse the law to know what God said. And I believe the greatest downfall to the nation of Israel throughout its history was that they forgot the law of God. They forgot it. They simply did not look to the law of God to see what God wanted them to do. In every instance from this point on, every time that Israel got in trouble, it all goes back to the law. And what Joshua said as he was getting ready to depart this earth, he said, "Behold, this day I'm going the way of all the earth. You know in all your hearts and all your souls that not one thing have failed of all the good things which the Lord your God hath spake concerning you. All have come to pass unto you, and not one thing has failed." God said to Abraham, "I'll make you children as the stars of the heaven, as the sand on the seashore, and I'm going to give you this land." God kept his promise. It was hard for God to do, because Israel didn't do what they were supposed to do, but God kept his promise. He worked out his will through the disobedient servants of Israel. God has promised us a home in heaven if we'll be faithful. If we'll remain faithful unto death, Revelation 2 and verse 10, then we'll receive a crown of righteousness. God will fulfill his promise. Jesus said, "In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you." He said, "I go to prepare a place for you." I believe that. I hope you do too. If you're here tonight and need to respond to the invitation, won't you do so while we stand and while we sing?